Frankenstein is a novel that is profoundly about gender, and specifically about women. And it takes us back to another of the myths that lies behind this work, the myth of Pygmalion and Galatea. Pygmalion, the sculptor who wants to make a sculpture of an ideal woman, and there are no women in the world who are good enough for this, and so he makes up a woman, a sculptured woman, out of his own imagination. And she is so perfect and so wonderful that he falls in love with her and prevails upon the gods to bring her to life, and then he marries her. So it's a kind of paradigmatic story about the creation of a female being by a man through art, without the use of a woman. And of course, Frankenstein's monster is also the product of a generation without the use of a woman. Frankenstein's monster has no mother. So, and Mary Shelley herself, of course, given her the death of her mother soon after she was born, grew up without a mother, and in a sense was the product of all the powerful men who were around her, many of whom were artists. So there's a great deal of sort of gender discussion in connection with generation and procreation and creativity in this book. And of course, in feminist terms, the male jealousy over women's procreative powers are paradigmatically seen in the desire to create without the use of women. I mean, this is a kind of standard line within feminism. So I want to just show some of the ways in which feminism and ideas about women appear in this novel. In discussing the books that Henry, Frankenstein's friend, likes, as opposed to the books that move Frankenstein, we get a kind of opposition between the romance, in the sense of the literary romance, versus the epic, the first of them being more feminine and the latter of them being more masculine. So when you read a romance, an Orientalist kind of writing, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy and the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroical poetry of Greece and Rome, the narrator tells us. So we get a contrast between feminine and masculine writing. And if we had to characterize Frankenstein, we have a lot of epic grandeur in the quest for the North Pole and the quest to become a scientist and create new life, and on the other hand, a lot of stories, at least, of familial golden days that contrast with that. So this is neither male nor female. What else is new with this novel? It never seems to make up its mind about anything. Domesticity, normally we think of as what feminism takes you belong. Women were stuck in the house, stuck in the family, stuck as mothers, whereas feminism presents them with a whole full range of human possibilities with no particular path in life restricted to them. So it seems maybe almost conservative of Mary Shelley to be presenting the home and domesticity as positive virtues, and yet over and over in this book she does. And if you think about her own life, my goodness, I mean, she had one disaster after another in her life. She was raised by a stepmother she didn't like and had to be taken away from her eventually because it was so unpleasant. Her father was busy with his own life and seems to have been a not very agreeable man in spite of all his great intellectual distinction and so on. She runs away with another man, and there's a lot of dead babies involved in that, and no doubt jealousy from the other entanglements that he was in. Life was hard for her, and the idea of a beautiful world like the Frankenstein household in Switzerland, with the mother looking after the best interests of everybody, and the children living in harmony and roaming the fields and mountains and so on, must have been very appealing. And she did take good care of the one child who she had who survived, and so on. So, and there is something eerie and off-putting about the idea of the romantic striver who is never happy with anything, and so on. So there's a way in which domesticity is being presented as respectable, in a way that you wouldn't expect from somebody who was also positing a very strong feminist line. The final disaster of the book is ultimately caused by Frankenstein's refusal to create a female figure. So he's the kind of anti-Apelles, the anti-Zeuxes, the anti-Pygmalion, in that he starts making a monster, a female monster to marry the monster, and then just can't bear the thought of doing so and rips her to pieces again. So it's the reversal of this idea of combining the pieces and adding electricity. He tears the pieces apart, and it's a violent and horrifying action that he performs, and he himself has nothing but distaste for it. And finally, the scene of Elizabeth's death. Frankenstein rushes into the wedding chamber where she's supposed to be waiting for him, and instead he finds her draped over the bed in death, and he faints, and then when he wakes up he sees her sort of on the bed again, with the monster looking through the window at him. That configuration of the destructive monster looking in as the friend or the beloved sees the victimized woman is exactly the same configuration that Walton sees of Frankenstein at the end, at the very end of the book. When Frankenstein dies, he is lying on the bed with the monster hanging over him. And it's an allusion to a painting by Henry Fuseli, a Swiss artist who was well known by Mary Shelley and all those around her. He was a very famous artist in that day, and they actually, I think her father owned some of the paintings or had written about them. The painting called The Nightmare, which shows sort of horrible bat-like creature sitting on the chest of the woman who is completely collapsed over, drooping over the bed with her arms extended over it. And that has always struck everybody as a kind of image of ultimate female passivity and victimization, and it's a very sexual image because she's lying on her bed as well. So there's a way in which this idea of the utterly passive female creature, female monster, woman as monster, haunted by the monster looking over her, and by her beloved looking over at that. I mean, it's a kind of shocking revision of Fuseli's picture as well.